Lesson 68, Decimals and Fractions. So the point of today's lesson is to be looking at a decimal and converting it into a fraction. And it's actually relatively simple to do using what we know already about place value and also what we know about fractions. All right, so we got to think back to earlier on at the beginning of the year when we talked about place value. And we spent some time on the whole numbers, but we also spent some time talking about place value for decimals. Okay, so here's our decimal point, that's our dividing line. And for today's lesson, we're going to be focusing mostly on the decimal portion of our place value chart. So I have a few examples to go through with you here, and we're going to start with this first example, which normally we would say as just 0.7. That's kind of the quick and easy way that we say decimals. But the official math way to say a decimal, remember, is to say 7/10. You are using the place value to name that fraction. So you would normally say 0.7, but the official math way to say this decimal is 7/10. Okay, and that's because the 7 is in the tenths place. Now, when you say 7/10 out loud, it should also make you think of a fraction. 7/10 we would also say as 7/10. And the reason for that is because, I maybe shouldn't have even used an arrow, I'll use an equal sign. 0.7 or 7/10 is the same as 7/10. We can use the same phrase to say it. It is 7/10. Okay, so it's that simple to take a decimal and change it into a fraction. Now let's look at this second example. The official math way to say it would be 5/10. So I just need to write it as, oops, my pen's not working very well lately, I don't know why. There we go, 5/10. Now, there is actually one more step that we need to do, and this step you will have to follow in your work today as well. If the fraction that you come up with is not in simplest form, you need to simplify. So 5/10 is not in simplest form because we can divide the top number and the bottom number by 5, making this 1/2. Okay, so whenever you're converting from a decimal to a fraction, you have to make sure that your final fraction is in simplest form. So 1/2 is in simplest form. In our first example, 7/10 was already in simplest form. There's nothing you can divide 7 and 10 by to simplify that fraction further. Now, let's say you come across this third example here and you have 0.15. It is just as simple to put that into a fraction, except for now we have two numbers behind the decimal. So if you have two numbers behind the decimal, your denominator of your fraction is going to be different. All right, so for our first two examples, we just had one number. The number was in the tenths place, so our denominator was a 10. But here the 5 is in the hundredths place. So our denominator actually becomes 100, okay, because of this last number in the hundredths place. And then all you do is you put a 15 on the top, a 1/5. So this is 15 hundredths, all right? And 15 hundredths is another one that's not quite in simplest form yet because we can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 5, and we end up with 3/20, or 3/20. Okay, and that's in simplest form. Now, you can follow the same pattern for all of these decimal examples. So here, my last example, I have 0.002. Because the last number of my decimal is now in the thousandths place, my denominator needs to be 1,000. And then all you do is you take your 2 and you put that on top. Because these are zeros here, you don't have to put them in front of that. You don't have to write 002, you can just write 2. Okay, so here's an example. This is 2 thousandths, and I can simplify that. So I divide by 2, divide by 2, we get 1/500, and that is in simplest form. All right, let's do just a couple more examples here. Here I have 0.047 because my last number is in that thousandths place. The denominator is right away 1,000, and then you just put a 47 on top. Now, some of your questions, you are going to have decimals that have a whole number in the front. And it's very, very simple to deal with those. So here we have 2.7. The 2 represents a whole number. So all you actually have to do is make this decimal into a mixed number. So you start with your 2 as the whole number, and then you take your 0.7 or your 7/10, and you simply write it as a fraction behind there. Okay, so if you have a whole number in front of the decimal, it just goes in front of your fraction to make a mixed number. So then here we have 3.5. You just have your whole number, the 3, and then we write 5/10. But here's an example, 5/10 can be simplified. It becomes 3 1/2. All right, so really just using place value to write these decimals as fractions, and then making sure at the end that you double check that all of your fractions are in simplest form. Because the answer key, once again, all of the answers are going to be in simplest form, so you need to make sure that your answers are in simplest form in order for them to be correct. And that's it for today.